Mara found the letter wedged between grocery flyers and a late bill, and for a second she thought it was another notice about money, but the handwriting stopped her, thin strokes that leaned the way her grandfather's hand used to lean when he wrote her name. She held the envelope above the sink light and watched the paper tremble, not from the fan or the cold, but from something older that rose up inside her chest. The return address was a small town she had not said out loud in years, and, seeing it made the apartment feel too quiet, as if the walls were listening. She sat at the table without turning on the television, because this was the kind of moment that asked for silence. She opened it carefully, tearing along the edge like the paper might bruise. The message inside was short and plain. No long explanations, no fancy words, just the kind of direct note a man like her grandfather would leave behind. It said that his house was now hers, that the paperwork was already handled, and that she should go soon. Mara let out a small laugh that sounded wrong in her own kitchen. A house was a big word for a man who fixed his own boots until the soles were thin, a man who washed jars and saved nails in coffee cans, a man who once told her that being poor was not the worst thing. The worst thing was being forgotten. She read the note again, slower this time, and her eyes caught on one last line, "Take care of it, it has been waiting." That sentence sat in her mind through the next 2 days like a stone in a pocket. Mara went to work and answered emails and nodded at meetings, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the house she remembered from childhood, the porch that groaned when you stepped on it, the smell of wood and dust and warm metal, the way her grandfather's radio played low in the evenings while he repaired things at the kitchen table. He was never dramatic, never the kind of man to talk about secrets, yet he always lived as if something mattered more than what people could see. Mara remembered how he would pause at certain doors in the hallway, not afraid, just careful, and how he would change the subject when she asked about his younger years. She had grown up and moved away and told herself that life was just life, bills and rent and tired mornings, but now the letter made her feel like she had missed something important. On the third morning she borrowed her friend Nora's old car, a small one that rattled when it started, and drove out before sunrise so she would not change her mind. The city thinned behind her, streetlights gave way to dark trees, and the highway became a long ribbon that seemed to pull her farther from her usual life with every mile. Her phone lost signal, then gained it, then lost it again. The radio found nothing but static, and Mara drove with her hands tight on the steering wheel. Watching fog sit low in the fields, she tried to remember the last conversation she had with her grandfather, but it was a blur of hospital lights and quiet words. He had squeezed her fingers once and looked at her like he wanted to say something. Then he only told her to eat, and to rest, and to be kind to herself. Now she wondered if he had been trying to give her a warning without scaring her, or a gift without making it heavy. The town appeared around a bend like a place that had been left behind by accident. A few buildings, a closed gas station, a diner with a faded sign. The streets empty except for a dog that crossed slowly as if it owned the morning. Mara drove past a small park and a row of houses that leaned toward each other like tired friends. She recognized the road to her grandfather's place. Even though the trees had grown taller, the air felt cooler here, and the silence was deeper. The house sat at the end of the lane behind tall grass that moved in the wind like slow waves. It looked worn but not broken. The roof still held its shape, the windows were dusty but not shattered, and the porch rail was still there, chipped and pale. Mara sat in the car for a moment and watched the house as if it might speak first. Then she stepped out, and the ground felt soft under her shoes, damp from night air. The smell of wet earth carried memories she did not ask for, and her throat tightened anyway. She climbed the porch steps, each one complaining under her weight, and she found the key exactly where it used to be, tucked beneath a loose board at the edge of the porch. The fact that it was still there made her feel watched, not in a scary way, but in the way a room feels when it remembers you. The door opened with a long groan, and the first breath of air inside smelled like thyme, wood, old cloth, and the faint trace of oil. Sunlight pushed through the front windows in pale strips, showing dust floating like tiny stars. The furniture stood where she remembered it, the chair by the window, the small table with a coaster still on top, a coat hanging on a hook that looked like it had been placed there yesterday. Mara walked slowly, touching the back of the chair with her fingertips, and she felt a strange pressure in the house, as if it was holding something in place. She moved down the hallway and noticed details she had forgotten. A small crack in the wall near the floor, a scuff mark by the corner, and then she saw something new, a low door behind a faded curtain, half hidden, the handle worn smooth as if used many times. Mara stood in front of it with her heart beating loud in her ears, and she realized the waiting was not only about the house, it was about whatever her grandfather had kept close, and whatever he had trusted only to her. Mara stood in front of the small hidden door for a long moment, her hand hovering near the handle but not touching it yet. The house felt quieter here, as if even the dust had settled to listen. She pulled the curtain aside and noticed how carefully it had been hung. Not forgotten, not random. This door had been meant to be hidden but also meant to be found. She took a breath and reminded herself that it was only a house. Only wood and nails and old memories. Yet her heart did not agree. It beat fast like it remembered something she did not. Finally she turned the handle, and felt a soft resistance before the door opened inward with a slow sound that felt older than the house itself. Behind the door was a narrow staircase leading down, the steps made of thick wood worn smooth in the center. A small light bulb hung from the ceiling, glowing faintly as if it had been left on just for her. Mara paused at the top, listening. There was no sound except her own breathing. She stepped down carefully, one step at a time, her hands sliding along the wall. The air grew cooler with each step, and the smell changed from dust and wood to something sharper, metal and paper and earth. When she reached the bottom, she found herself in a low room, wider than she expected, clean in a careful way, not abandoned, not rushed, but maintained slowly over time. The room held shelves along every wall, wooden shelves lined with boxes, jars, and stacks of papers tied with string. A work table sat in the center with a single chair pushed in neatly. Nothing was scattered, nothing felt accidental. Mara walked forward slowly, her eyes moving across labels written in her grandfather's handwriting, dates, places, small notes she did not yet understand. Some boxes were marked with town names, others with numbers. One shelf held glass jars filled with small metal pieces, keys of different shapes and sizes, hundreds of them, all cleaned and sorted. She reached out and touched one jar, and the glass was cool, solid, real. Her grandfather had not been collecting trash, he had been keeping track. Mara picked up one stack of papers and untied the string carefully. Inside were letters, old and yellowed, written by different hands, some formal, some rushed, some with stains that looked like rain or coffee. She read a few lines and felt a slow wave of understanding begin to rise. These were not personal letters, they were records, agreements, promises made quietly between people who trusted her grandfather. One letter thanked him for keeping something safe, another asked him to hold on just a little longer. None of them explained what that something was, but all of them carried the same tone: relief, gratitude, patience. Mara felt her legs weaken and she sat down in the chair, the weight of the room settling on her shoulders. She remembered now how neighbors used to stop by the house when she was young. Not loud visitors, but quiet ones, people who stayed for short times and left calmer than when they arrived. She remembered her grandfather listening more than he spoke, nodding slowly, putting things away in his pockets or drawers without showing them. At the time she had thought he was simply kind, someone people trusted because he did not ask questions. But this room told a bigger story. He had been a keeper, a holder of things others could not afford to lose. Mara felt a strange mix of pride and fear. Pride that he had lived a life with meaning she never saw, fear that she was now standing where he once stood. On the table she noticed a single notebook placed apart from the rest, newer than the others, its cover worn at the edges. She opened it slowly and recognized his writing immediately. Larger here, more careful, as if he wanted every word to last. The first page held only a few lines, written clearly. This is for Mara. If you are reading this, then you are ready. Do not rush. Everything has its place. Her throat tightened. She turned the page and found lists, names crossed out, dates circled, small notes about returns completed and items delivered. Whatever her grandfather had been doing, he had been finishing it step by step, and this notebook felt like the final piece. Mara spent hours in the room without noticing time pass. She read until her eyes hurt and her head felt full. She did not understand everything, but she understood enough to know this was not about money or secrets meant to shock. It was about trust built slowly, about protecting people who had nowhere else to turn, about keeping things safe when the world moved too fast. When the light from upstairs shifted and grew warmer, she finally stood, her body stiff, her mind buzzing. She closed the notebook carefully and placed it back where it belonged. Then she looked around the room again, not as a stranger now, but as someone who had been chosen. When she climbed the stairs back up, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if it had exhaled. She stepped into the kitchen and sat at the old table where her grandfather used to drink his tea. The silence no longer felt empty, it felt full of memory. Mara realized that inheriting the house was not the real gift. The real gift was the responsibility that came with it. He had trusted her to decide what came next. She did not yet know how to handle what she had found, but she knew she would not walk away, As evening settled outside and shadows stretched across the floor, Mara stayed seated, listening to the quiet, understanding that her life had shifted, not loudly, not suddenly, but deeply, and whatever waited ahead would ask her to become someone stronger than she had planned to be. Mara woke the next morning on the narrow couch in the living room, sunlight pressing gently through the curtains. For a brief second she forgot where she was. Then the quiet reminded her. This was not her apartment with traffic sounds and buzzing phones. This was the house that held 100 quiet promises. She sat up slowly, her body sore from the old cushions, her mind already full. The notebook from the hidden room rested on the table where she had placed it the night before. She did not open it yet. Instead she walked through the house, opening windows one by one, letting fresh air mix with the older smells. As the rooms breathed she felt something settle inside her, a sense that staying here was no longer a choice but a step she had already taken. By midday Mara began organizing without planning to. She cleaned the kitchen table, stacked old plates, wiped dust from shelves, her movements steady and calm. She felt closer to her grandfather while doing simple things, as if he had always believed work should be quiet and careful. Every drawer she opened reminded her how little he owned for himself and how much space he had given to others. When she returned to the hidden room she did so with less fear. She sat again at the table and opened the notebook, this time reading slowly, following his careful notes about people who trusted him to hold items, documents, keys, letters. Some had already been returned, others were marked waiting, and beside each waiting name was a small symbol, a reminder that the time was not right yet. The first knock on the door came just before evening, soft and unsure. Mara froze for a moment before answering. When she opened it she found an older woman standing on the porch, her hair tied back, her eyes tired but kind. She looked past Mara into the house as if checking that it was still there. Then she smiled faintly. "I heard he passed," the woman said quietly. "I am sorry." Mara nodded and stepped aside without thinking. The woman walked in slowly, her hands folded together. She looked around and nodded again. "Everything still feels right," she said. Before Mara could ask anything the woman explained she had come only to see if the house was still standing and to say thank you. She did not say for what, but when she left she touched Mara's arm gently and said your grandfather was a good keeper. After that visit others came, not all at once, but spread over days, always one at a time, always respectful. A man with rough hands who brought bread, a quiet couple who left flowers on the porch, a young woman who looked nervous until she stepped inside. Each visitor spoke little, yet each one carried the same relief in their eyes. Mara did not need to ask questions. She listened the way her grandfather had, nodding, offering tea, letting silence do most of the work. Slowly she matched names to notes in the notebook. Some items were returned, others stayed where they were, and each time she unlocked a box or lifted a jar she felt the weight of choice. She understood now that this work required patience more than bravery. One evening as rain tapped lightly against the windows, Mara found a section in the notebook she had not noticed before. The writing there was slower, more personal. Her grandfather wrote about how trust was not owned, only borrowed, and how a keeper must never confuse holding something with controlling it. He wrote that fear makes people rush and rushing breaks what time could fix. Mara closed the notebook and stared at the wall. She thought of her own life in the city, how rushed everything had been, how tired she always felt without knowing why. The house had slowed her in a way nothing else ever had. It demanded presence, not speed, and she realized she did not want to return to her old life just yet. As weeks passed the town began to recognize her, not loudly, not with celebration, but with quiet acceptance. People waved when she walked to the small store. The diner owner offered her tea without asking. Children played near the road again. The house no longer felt like a place people avoided. It felt open, not exposed, but available. Mara fixed small things the way her grandfather had, tightening loose boards, oiling hinges, cleaning jars. She learned which keys matched which boxes, and which names carried heavy histories. Some nights she lay awake wondering if she was strong enough for this role. But each morning the house greeted her with the same steady calm, reminding her that strength could grow slowly. One afternoon Mara received a letter with no return address. The paper was thick and clean. Inside was a single sentence asking if the house still held what was promised long ago. Her hands shook as she read it. She searched the notebook and found the matching symbol, a mark her grandfather used rarely, meaning the choice would be difficult but necessary. She sat for a long time before acting, staring at the shelves, feeling the quiet pressure of responsibility. Finally she stood and reached for a box she had not opened before. It was heavier than it looked, and as she carried it to the table she understood that whatever was inside would not only change someone else's life, It would change hers as well, because the moment she chose to open it, she would no longer be only the granddaughter who inherited a house, she would be the keeper who decided what the house would become next. Mara sat at the table with the heavy box resting in front of her. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle sound, and the house felt alert. She placed her hands on the lid and waited until her breathing matched the quiet around her. When she opened it, she found layers of wrapped items, each protected with care. Beneath them were documents tied with dark string, older than most of the others. These papers spoke of land once taken unfairly, of families pushed aside without voice. Her grandfather had stepped in when no one else would, not to fight loudly but to hold proof until the right moment arrived. Mara felt the weight of history press against her chest. She understood now why this box had waited so long. The letter that matched the box came from a man named Samuel, a name marked with a rare symbol in the notebook. He arrived 2 days later just before sunset, his shoulders bent from years of waiting rather than age. When Mara invited him inside, he stood still for a moment, taking in the room as if confirming something important. She brought the box to the table and unwrapped it slowly. Samuel watched without interrupting. When she showed him the documents, his hands trembled, not from fear but from release. He told her how his family had lost everything decades ago, how her grandfather had promised to keep the truth safe until it could no longer be ignored. Tears ran down Samuel's face as he thanked her, and Mara realized that returning what was kept could heal wounds time alone never touched. Word spread quietly after that, not as gossip but as trust renewed. More letters arrived, some cautious, some hopeful. Mara followed the notebook carefully, never rushing a decision. She learned that being a keeper was not about choosing sides but about honoring time and patience. One case required her to refuse. The moment was not right and she held firm despite pressure. Another required her to travel to a nearby town to hand something over in person. Each action changed how she saw herself. The fear she once felt turned into steadiness. She was no longer pretending to understand her grandfather's life, she was living a continuation of it. As months passed, the house itself seemed to respond. The air felt warmer, the rooms brighter, people no longer hesitated at the gate. Children's laughter returned to the road. Mara fixed the porch rail and repainted the door the same soft color it had been years ago. She kept the hidden room exactly as it was, respecting its purpose. Some nights she sat there reading old notes, feeling guided rather than alone. She spoke to her grandfather quietly in those moments, not asking questions but sharing updates, and she felt certain he would approve of her care. One morning Mara stood outside and realized she no longer thought of the city as home. The thought surprised her but did not scare her. The house had given her more than shelter or responsibility. It had given her direction. She wrote to her job and explained she would not be returning soon. She simplified her life the way her grandfather had, keeping only what mattered. The town accepted her choice without comment, and the house stood steady as ever, waiting for each new moment with calm patience. Late one evening Mara found a final note tucked inside the notebook, written in her grandfather's hand but clearly meant for this stage of her life. It spoke of endings that were also beginnings, of how a keeper must one day prepare another to take their place. Mara closed the notebook and smiled softly. She was not ready to think that far ahead yet, but she understood the path now. The strange house had not changed everything by revealing a secret, it had changed everything by teaching her how to hold trust without owning it. And as she turned off the light and let the house rest, Mara knew the story was not ending, it was settling into something that would last. Mara woke before dawn on the day she felt the change coming. The house was quiet but not asleep, the kind of quiet that comes before something important. She made tea and sat at the kitchen table where so many conversations had passed without words. The notebook lay open beside her, nearly full now, most names marked complete, a few still waiting. She realized she was no longer reading it for guidance alone. She was reading it to understand how her grandfather had learned when to let go. The thought made her chest tighten, not with fear, but with respect for the balance he had lived by. That morning a young boy arrived with his mother, both nervous and hopeful. They spoke softly, explaining that they had been sent by someone who said the house could help. Mara listened the way she always did, slowly and without judgment. She did not promise anything. She only invited them in. Later, after checking the notebook and opening a small box that held nothing more than a letter and a key, she knew this was one of the final responsibilities her grandfather had prepared for. When she handed the items over, the boy smiled for the first time, and his mother closed her eyes as if a long weight had lifted. Watching them leave, Mara felt something settle deep inside her, a sense of completion that was gentle rather than dramatic. As the seasons turned, the house remained steady, but Mara noticed how her role was changing. Fewer people came with heavy worries, more came simply to visit, to talk, to sit on the porch and share stories. The house had become known as a place of calm rather than secrecy, and that felt right. Her grandfather had never wanted attention, only resolution. Mara began teaching herself how to record things clearly, how to leave notes that explained not just what was kept, but why it mattered. She understood now that the future keeper would need clarity more than mystery. One afternoon Mara walked through the hidden room and imagined it without her. The thought no longer frightened her. Instead it felt like planning a garden that would bloom after she stepped away. She began sorting what remained, returning items that no longer needed holding, sealing others with clear instructions. She wrote in her own hand beside her grandfather's notes, careful not to erase his voice but to add to it. The house watched quietly, patient as ever, as if approving her preparation. The town changed around her in small ways. The diner reopened for longer hours, the park benches were repaired, neighbors helped each other more openly. Mara never claimed credit, but she saw how trust spread when people believed someone would hold space for them without judgment. She became part of the town without becoming its center, exactly the way her grandfather had been. Some evenings she sat on the porch and watched the sky darken, feeling full in a way she never had before, not rich in money but rich in purpose. Near the end of the year Mara received a letter written in a careful but unfamiliar hand. It was from a young woman who had heard about the house and wanted to learn, not to take anything, but to understand how keeping worked. Mara read the letter twice, then smiled. She felt the quiet click of recognition. This was not a request born from need, but from readiness. She invited the woman to visit, not promising answers, only conversation. When the woman arrived they talked for hours, about patience, about listening, about how power should never feel loud. Mara did not hand over keys or secrets, she only shared stories, just as her grandfather once had with her. Watching the woman listen with care, Mara felt a deep sense of rightness. The cycle was not ending, it was continuing, shaped by time and trust rather than urgency. That night Mara walked through the house one last time with a new understanding. She touched the walls, the table, the door to the hidden room, not in farewell, but in gratitude. The strange house had changed everything, not by giving her answers, but by giving her a place where answers could arrive slowly. As she turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, Mara knew that whatever paths opened next, the house would remain what it had always been, a quiet promise kept, waiting patiently for the next person ready to listen.